Hello, I'm Possum from Possum Labs, and today we'll continue the set of DSL tutorials, starting with number 7, where we're actually going to be talking about a complex data example dealing with data hierarchies. And this is assuming you are using the DSL.Core version, not the English version. All right, let's take a quick look at the actual setup. So this is the data we're going to be dealing with. We're not really worried about the actual fields that are involved in this. This is going to be specific to the actual application, but it doesn't really help illustrate things. So what we're dealing with is 3 levels. We have a dealer, which has stores and inventory locations. There's a many-to-many relationship between the store and the inventory location. Users are associated to stores, and items are associated to inventory locations. And this is where we would build up our hierarchy before we actually start to worry about the running of a test, right? So, for instance, we want to sell an item. The steps involved in selling an item don't matter. What matters here is that to do that, we need to have an item, and we need a person to do the selling. So that means that we also need a store, an inventory location, right? Because people belong to stores and items belong to inventory locations. And that means we need a dealer. So there's a couple of different ways you can go about this. I would advise you to, whenever possible, create new data. The benefit of having new data is that your failures are going to be reproducible and you don't end up finding problems that don't exist yet. So for instance, the application may not elegantly handle a scenario where an inventory location has 1,000 items. Now, this may never happen in your actual production environment, but if you keep reusing the same inventory location for all of your tests, it's going to happen in your test environment. Now, is this a problem? Yeah, at some point. Is it a problem that you need to fix right now? Is this the most effective use of the resources of the organization? Probably not, right? You're trying to solve the problems that your customers encounter. You're not trying to solve the problems that you encounter because you took shortcuts in your tests. And that's the most important thing, right? You want to test and focus your testing, and by creating new data, you can focus your testing to the specific scenario. If you want to do testing of load testing, like figure out what happens when your data sets become larger, create larger data sets and test for those specific things. Don't conflate the two, or you end up with too much noise. People start neglecting the test cases, and you have a lot of problems in the long run. So we do have a problem here, though, because what's going to happen with this test isn't really, it's really not the problem of this test. It's the problem of the next test. Because what people are going to do with the next test is they're going to copy the entire background of this test to the next test, because they're like, well, we need all this stuff anyway. And when you start dealing with more specific fields around here or deeper hierarchies, this becomes a big problem because there's lots of copy pasting that's happening and it makes it harder to maintain things. But we've learned a bunch of different things, right? We've learned how to use templates. So if we do templates, we can solve some of the problems around the spatula. We don't have those additional fields, we now use a template. But we also learned how to use characteristics. And when we're dealing with characteristics, we can solve the damaged issue. And we have learned how to use defaults. And now we can really trim things down to the minimum viable set of information that we need to run this particular scenario. And this is going to allow you to have the most maintainable test cases in the long run. And for the people who don't like default, you can actually go to the implicit defaults where, you just leave it off. Okay, so let's take a quick look at actually what's happening and how we have to set things up for this to be possible. So under entities, we're going to have our dealers, inventory locations, items, stores, and users. Let's first go look at dealers. So we have our dealer. A dealer doesn't have much going on, but the important thing is that we do set up that we have a default for our dealer, right? And this default is what's going to get used by all the other parts. So when we take a look at our inventory location is set up so that we always so that we decorate our dealer to say that, hey, this can be defaulted. Now, the inventory location also has a default setup for it. And we have this decorate new item call in here, which allows us to decorate the inventory location we just created, which allows the dealer to be populated and the dealer to be created. Right, so this repository.decorate new item call that you're going to find in all of these different repositories is the part that allows us to dig down all the different levels. So when we want to create an item, right, we specify our item. Now the item is something new, so we end up down here in the given the items. So in here, for every item, we do call the decorate. The decorate on the item is going to discover that we have this default to repository default on the inventory location. This will create the inventory location using a default creation method on the inventory location repository. And that will then end up in here, and we call the decorate on the inventory location, which will then create our dealer. Right, so that's how we keep chaining through the entire system. So we create the item pulls in an inventory location. By creating the inventory location, it pulls in the dealer. And we have the same kind of chain that's going on with our users. Our users have a store, and if you look at the store, you have the dealer. So this is how these different bits and pieces work together, and this is how you can structure your data. Now, there's a couple of other things going on in here. We have a template for our item, right? This is just dealing with the spatula where we specify some fields. But that's about it. So there's a couple of reasons why this structure came into being. One of the reasons, let's go back to the original example, which is the problem, is the copy pasting. We talked about this before. The other reason is that you may end up in a scenario where a user requires something else, right? It requires some additional thing to be set. You don't just need a store, but you also need to have a billing account. And a billing account is another kind of entity. By having defaults, you can introduce these new concepts in your application without you having to go into all of the different places where you have stuff being copy-pasted and having to clean things up there. Right, so it makes it a little bit more agile, makes it a little bit easier to change as you're going down the line, while still being able to reuse the existing objects. Maintenance of Gherkin is not easy, primarily because the tooling around Gherkin is a glorified text editor. Right, you don't have a refactor option. Right, you have rename. I wouldn't trust it, but there isn't much of an option going on in here. Whereas if we go look in here, you know, you have a lot more options. The IDE is far more powerful when you're dealing with C# than with Gherkin. So by moving some of the functionality out of the Gherkin, right, and writing a little bit more C#, we end up, you know, with a better matching between where is the power of our tools compared to where is the actual things that we have to maintain. Plus, I like that it's cleaner, simpler. It's easier to hand this off to somebody and say, given this scenario, what's going on? And all of the bits and pieces that don't matter don't confuse people, and it makes it easier to understand. It's faster to understand. It takes less time. It's all around cheaper for the entire organization to keep these things, maintain them, and learn from them. Anyway, this wraps up the core series for the DSL tutorial. There's going to be more videos that are dealing with interacting with websites or some of the advanced topics. Please let me know below in the comments what you thought of these, if you like them, if there's any particular examples you'd like to dig into more, and I'd love to hear your feedback. Thank you very much for your time and your attention.